My name is Michele Stricker. I am the Deputy State Librarian here at the New Jersey State Library for Library Development. I want to welcome you all. And I also want to acknowledge that we have partners for our presentation today on communicating about climate change. And first, I want to welcome the New Jersey Library Association as our partner. Agreed to partner on this. Of course, their theme for the year and for the NJLA conference coming up at the end of May and into June is sustainability. So that was a perfect fit for us to partner with them. And I also want to give a plug for NJLA's new sustainability section, which is just getting off the ground. And for all you New Jersey folks, I'm really hoping that you'll check it out and join and become an active member of the section in NJLA. So a big thank you to NJLA for agreeing to partner with us today. And also welcome to Rebekkah Smith Aldrich. And I'm going to give you a full background on Rebekkah in a minute, but she's here representing the National Sustainable Libraries Initiative. And we're delighted to have them partner with us on this webinar. I do want to say that I did see the webinar presented by our FEMA Region 2. This is when I first saw the webinar. And for all of you on the call, FEMA Region 2 represents New Jersey, New York, and Puerto Rico. So I think it was great that we were able to adapt something from our own FEMA region and then join together in a partnership with New York and New Jersey. And I look forward, Rebekkah and I both, I'm sure, look forward to doing this more and more in the future. Again, I want to say that, please put your stuff in the chat if you want to say, talk about yourselves. Q&A, questions in the Q&A. But I also want to tell you a little bit about why we thought having this webinar on communicating about climate change was important. I mean, it's not only to discuss like the causes and the mechanisms of climate change and how climate change has already, really affected both of our states. There's going to be further long-term and short-term impacts as we go along that are happening more and more frequently. But also we wanted to discuss or, have them discuss or presenters best practices for communications with the public about climate change and with special considerations for librarians. We wanted to talk a little bit about how you as a librarian or library staff even can connect with your audience on climate change and the elements of climate change and focus on what you can do and what you can avoid and, the importance of having this narrative on climate communication. And so that's why we thought this presentation by David and Cara would be especially appropriate for libraries. So moving on from there, I want to introduce you to Rebekkah Smith Aldrich, who I know many of you know. Rebekkah has her MLS and her lead AP, and she's the executive director of the Mid-Hudson Library System. And sometimes I think we're attached at the hips these days. We do so much work together, and it's always wonderful to work with her. Rebekkah is also an advisory board member of the ALA Center for the Future of Libraries and is a founding board member of the ALA Sustainability Roundtable and the co-founder of the Sustainable Libraries Initiative. And I know she's going to talk a little bit about that. She's a frequent international speaker on the topics of libraries and sustainability. And Smith Aldrich is also the author of Sustainable Thinking, Ensuring Your Library's Future in an Uncertain World and Resilience, which is part of the library's feature series from ALA Editions. And she is the sustainability columnist for Library Journal. You can learn more about her at sustainablelibraries.org and more about the Sustainable Libraries program. But right now, welcome, Rebekkah. I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks for partnering with us on the webinar.
Always a pleasure. When I get an email from Michele, I just say yes, even before I read it, because it's a joy to work with Michele. So thank you everyone for being here today. The Sustainable Library Initiative is proud to help promote this program and get the word out about it. Those of you in our network know we spend a lot of time helping libraries figure out their place in climate action and what it looks like to be a part of bringing down greenhouse gas emissions to mitigate climate change, as well as to help communities thrive in the face of climate change and adapt as necessary with an eye towards climate justice in the work we do in our community. So, shout out to the New Jersey Library Association and Jessica, who is the president president this year, for focusing on sustainability and inviting us into your world in New Jersey. We're thrilled to have all members of the New Jersey Library Association now as members of the Sustainable Library Initiative. And we're just thrilled that Michele thought to connect all of us for this important program today and talking and communicating about climate change. As Michele said, I present a lot on this topic, and I frequently get asked questions about how to talk about climate change. It sometimes is a touchy subject in more conservative areas. It still needs some nuance when we're talking about it, but we can't let that hold us back from action. So we're thrilled today to have two experts. You know, Michele and I are lay people. We have just studied our butts off to learn this stuff and help everybody with it. We've got folks who specialize in this and are doctorates in this. So I just want to introduce our speakers and get you into their hands as fast as possible here today, because that's going to be a really good use of our time. So I'd like to first introduce Dr. David Robinson, who is a distinguished professor and, very interestingly, the New Jersey state climatologist. Like, how cool is that? So Dr. Robinson is an earth scientist, and more specifically, a physical geographer and climatologist. His research interests run the spatial gamut from global to local, with underlying theme being the development of a better understanding of the climate system. He maintains an internationally recognized database of Northern Hemisphere's snow extent to a satellite era, super appropriate for today here, at least in upstate New York. Sorry, Mary, I heard you didn't get any snow. This information is used in the Global Snow Lab's research endeavors, the efforts of others, and in contributions to national and international climate assessments. And as the New Jersey state climatologist, Dr. Robinson conducts research of an applied nature that focuses on the diverse weather and climate of the Garden State specifically. This includes topics such as climate change, drought, flooding, and issues involving agriculture, transportation, public safety, and commerce, because we all know climate change affects just about every facet of our life. So pretty cool to have the New Jersey state climatologist with us. Welcome, Dr. Robinson. And we also have Dr. Cara Cuite with us, which, how cool is that last name? But Dr. Cuite is an assistant extension specialist and assistant professor in the Department of Human Ecology, which is obviously part of the work we do here in libraries to help the society respond in the face of climate change. Dr. Cuite is a health psychologist who studies community food security, risk communication, and public perceptions of food-related issues, including food safety and genetically engineered food. Her recent projects focus on communicating about weather-related emergencies, reducing household food, energy, and water use, and designing programming and evaluation to reduce food insecurity among students at Rutgers University in New Brunswick. Dr. Cuite is also on the executive committee of Rutgers Against Hunger and works closely with the New Brunswick Community Farmers Market. Her work has been funded by the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, National Center for Food Protection and Defense, New Jersey Sea Grant, and Johnson & Johnson. So we'd like to welcome Drs. Robinson and Cuite for joining us here today. Thank you so much.
Terrific. Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Rebekkah and Michele. And it's great to be sharing the time with my colleague, Cara. We've done some tag teams before, and we've been on a few projects together, post-Sandy, for instance. So it's always a pleasure to team up with Cara. Let me share my screen here, and we'll get off to discussing the fundamentals of climate and climate change. It's going to have a Jersey leaning to it, but it will apply to New York, the Mid-Atlantic, the Northeast, however you might want to look at it, and in some sense, globally. And it is important that we learn about this, we understand it, and be able to communicate all we know about climate and climate change, so we can have a more informed citizenry. And with this understanding, we can work together to make some very important decisions. There's my introduction again, a nice shot down along the Delaware Bay coast in Jersey. Well, greetings from the State Climate Office. Yes, there is a State Climate Office in most every state. Massachusetts doesn't have one right now, but New York does up at Cornell, and we're at the land-grant university here in New Jersey. And as a State Climate Office, we help people make decisions that involve weather and/or climate. And that's just about everything when you think about it. We don't make the decision for you, but we'll provide the information, we'll provide the expertise on that side of the ledger, the weather and climate side, to help you make that decision. And among state climatologists, we know our states well. I'm a native of New Jersey, only 2 towns from New York State growing up in Bergen County, and went to grad school at Columbia and spent time at the Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory just over the border in Rockland County. So now no bona fides for New York, but a lot of experience with New York. And our credo is locals trusting locals. We know the climate of our region. We can help the stakeholders, our clients, if you will, make decisions. But again, we're not going to make them for you. We're going to provide that information. And when it comes to communicating climate and climate change, we're out there as state climate offices. I give 40 or 50 public presentations a year. I talked at a combined FEMA, New Jersey Office of Emergency Management, New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection workshop this morning with mayors and locals from several southern New Jersey coastal communities on the Atlantic and Delaware coast, just for instance. Anyway, moving on. Looking at our climate system writ large, it is a system, no beginning, no end. Everything is connected. You can't pull anything out and just look at it very long without bringing something else in there. The energy comes from our sun. We've got all these spheres, the atmosphere, the water-based hydrosphere, the lithosphere, our mountains, the layout of our landscape, volcanoes that might spew ash and gases into the atmosphere, short-term affecting our climate, the biosphere, our rainforests to our deserts, and then the cryosphere. Mentioned I do snow and ice outside in New Jersey. I'm kind of a snowman on a global sense, and that's sea ice, glaciers, ice sheets, snow cover, even permanently frozen ground. And then finally, front and center there in that figure is humankind. We play a major role in this nowadays, be it through deforestation, urbanization, the combustion of fossil fuels, the emission of dust and particulate matter into the atmosphere, so on and so forth. So we are kind of front and center in this system in this day and age. You've already heard me say climate and weather. I'm a climatologist. I know enough meteorology to be dangerous. Today's weather data is tomorrow's climate information. And then we look ahead months and years and decades ahead climatologically. Our climate system underpins the day-to-day weather. So if our climate system's changing, it's going to impact to some extent our day-to-day weather, although that weather may have quite a bit of variability in a natural sense as well. So weather's kind of short-term, climate the longer term, if you will. The weather here in the mid-Atlantic and Northeast is wedged between colder air to our north, warmer air to our south. We have an ocean to our east, a continent to our west. So we've got this squeeze play, as I like to call it. And this applies to New York as well as New Jersey, where we tend to import our weather and our underlying climate rather than home grow it. Now, we have sea breezes and things like that that are local. And you could even say, in some respects, the lake effect snows off of the Great Lakes in Erie and Ontario are somewhat locally produced, but they're driven by that cold air that comes out of Canada. And our rains and snows of today are driven by a system that came across the country and is gathering moisture off the Atlantic and going to soak or whiten this area, depending where you are and at what time during the event. So that gives us our 4 seasons. It gives us a variety of weather from month to month, week to week, day to day. Heck, in the last hour where I sit in central New Jersey, it's been snowing, it's been raining, it's been doing nothing, it's back to snow again, that kind of pattern, which makes it all so darn interesting, but a little frustrating at times too, to understand all that's going on. Here in New Jersey, And this applies to New York, this applies globally. The weather and climate is controlled locally by multiple factors, be it altitude, which is having a big impact on whether it's raining or snowing today, latitude, that's having an impact as well. By surface conditions, I mean, as in an urban landscape or a forested landscape, be it the Adirondacks or the pinelands of New Jersey. And then land water contrasts are so huge along our coastal areas, our lake shores, our bay shores and such, which can have such an important influence on local weather conditions. So we're all in it in a general sense here in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast, but you get the nuances within the region based on these and other factors as well, but these are key ones. I'm going through a litany of memorable storms here in New Jersey, but they do apply along the Long Island coast in some cases and in Long Island Sound and elsewhere. A major nor'easter in 1962 that some people on here, including myself, I barely remember, and certainly remember the aftermath that just pummeled the coast for multiple days that March. We had a major drought in the Northeast in the mid 60s, 64 to 66. Perhaps tree rings up the Hudson Valley and over down in the Potomac River Valley tell us that it perhaps was the worst drought of the last 500 years in the Mid-Atlantic and Northeast. And there's the Delaware River bed that you can see the far left. You can see a little bit of the flow of the river. And of course, this is Jermaine from waters coming from the Catskills, the Poconos, and shorelines of Western Jersey and Eastern Pennsylvania down to Delaware Bay, a major drought. We've had major flooding events time and time again in the last couple of decades. Floyd, have to throw in a snowstorm, a major post-Christmas blizzard back in 2010 that really pummeled coastal New Jersey and Long Island, New York City area more than the Delaware Valley. Irene, which soaked not only New Jersey, but the rains went up the Hudson into the Catskills and to Vermont with catastrophic flooding from the remnants of Irene in August 2011. And then something none of us who lived through it will ever forget, a truly transformative event, Sandy, in October 29th, 2012. And by transformative, I mean to the environment, but also to society and social consciousness of these major extreme events. On the top left, you can see New York City in the background, but that's Hoboken, New Jersey, underwater. Coastal New Jersey, mainland coastal New Jersey in the lower left flooded out. A major breach of a barrier peninsula near Maniloking in New Jersey, where the Barnegat Bay joined the Atlantic Ocean until they sealed it back up a couple of days later. And then one of my students taking a picture of he and his friend on Long Beach Island in New Jersey following the event with tremendous coastal erosion, multiple feet of water in his home that particular night. And then there was Ida, which affected southeastern Pennsylvania, central northern New Jersey, and New York City and parts of southern New England in September 1st, 2021. In 6 hours, the area right here in the pink received over 8 inches of rain. That's 2 months of rain in 6 hours. And tragically, 30 drowning deaths within just this area of New Jersey, a real tragic event with flash flooding and river flooding. The debris left over in the town of Manville, which is about 1.5 miles from where I'm speaking, shortly after President Biden came to check out the damage. And then in the southern part of the state, the strongest tornado since 1990, an EF3 tornado that because of communication, the word got out, people took cover, and no one was seriously injured or killed. Communication succeeded to the point where we don't know how many people it saved in central New Jersey that fateful night, but we know it did not succeed completely. And that's something that will bother me for the rest of my life, as we provided data hourly, every 5 minutes from our weather network in the state. And it was heeded by the Weather Service and emergency management. Word did get out, but people either didn't hear it, or if they heard it, they didn't know how to respond to it. And that's where Cara can talk more about that in terms of an emergency event, as well as climate change, because that's the important thing. They're connected. They're connected. We can learn from these emergency events how to prepare for the future. We can learn, when we talk about the future, how to handle these short-term emergency extreme events. Quickly turning to climate change. It's happening. Put New Jersey in there, put New York in there, put the globe in there. It's happening everywhere. Humans are responsible, particularly over the last 40 to 50 years. There has been a signal emerge from a very chaotic, noisy climate system. A signal has emerged that has humankind written all over it. This is based on theory, the greenhouse theory. It's based on observations, and it's based on sophisticated numerical climate models built on basic physics and run on some of the world's fastest computers. So it's not just one thing that's telling us that the climate is changing and humans are responsible for that change. It's a multitude of effects. The greenhouse effect, naturally, the Earth's atmosphere serves as a blanket. It allows solar radiation into the Earth's surface and near surface, but it slows its departure, as if a blanket on a bed slows the loss of heat from your body out into your bedroom at night. You put a blanket on, and that holds the heat there for a time, but eventually it will escape out to your bedroom or out to space with Earth. So what we're doing as humans are adding greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide, methane. That in turn warms the atmosphere a little bit with that blanket, which allows the atmosphere to retain more water vapor. And the water vapor is the most ubiquitous greenhouse gas. And that helps to amplify the warming. So think of this as we're throwing another blanket on the bed by increasing our levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and other gases, with carbon dioxide right now levels in the atmosphere not having been experienced on Earth in at least the last 2 million years. That's where we've gone in our industrial era when it comes to polluting our atmosphere, and it's going to impact and is impacting the climate. Here in New York and New Jersey area, this is a Jersey figure, but again, it applies throughout the world in some respects. You can look at these curves, and if you squint a little, you wouldn't know if it was New Jersey, New York, the US, or the globe. In the last 40 or so years in particular, we have had this signal of human influence on the climate emerge from a very noisy climate system that had natural changes here, natural variability, as well as some human influence. But we really hit a tipping point around 1980, and climate models recreating the past suggest that without human influence on the atmosphere, we would be on a flat line over the last 40 years, temperature-wise, ups and downs, ups and downs. The only way you can explain this rise in temperature over the last 40 years is if you put human influences on the climate system into the game, if you will. And the same goes in some respects for precipitation. What's interesting about precipitation is not just that New Jersey's had its 2 wettest years since 1895, just within the last decade or so, but that there's a lot of interannual variability in the last 40 or 50 years since the major drought of the 60s. And there wasn't nearly as much early in the 20th century. So this just informs us we have to be prepared. We have to be able to explain extremes from the drought end or the dry end, or the wet end, or sometimes the flooding end of things, more in the way of volatility extremes in the atmosphere. Now we'll turn, since we're both coastal states, to sea level. And sea level's rising. This is at Atlantic City. It's very similar to sea level curves at the Battery in lower Manhattan. Sea level's gone up about 1.5 feet in the last century. Some of that's due to natural processes within the Earth itself, geodesy and whatever you might speak of. But some of it is due to the waters of the ocean warming and thermally expanding, and some glaciers and ice sheets beginning to melt and putting more water in the bathtub, if you will. So it's a multitude of effects, but the major signal here is provided by the warming of the oceans and the increase in runoff from glaciers and ice sheets. In fact, the oceans have warmed so much, they actually hold about 90% of the heat that's been generated by these increased greenhouse gases is being held by the oceans. Only 10% is responsible for the warming we've seen in the atmosphere. So I guess we owe a lot to the oceans in a sense, because they're helping to temper what we're doing to our climate system. But in the same account, they're also greatly impacting our ocean waters and are likely to well into the future. This is just a schematic of climate models that involve the atmosphere, the ocean, and the land surfaces. And we'll just leave it at that for now. But they are our eyes, they're our crystal ball into the future. We can run those models and recreate the past and be pretty comfortable they're doing a good job. And that with that knowledge, we can then turn the dials. We can turn up the carbon dioxide. We can reduce or add dust and dirt to the atmosphere and run our models into the future and see what they project. And they're projecting increasing temperatures globally. In the Northeast, increasing precipitation, or at least steady precipitation, particularly in the winter. A little worried about the summers not getting wetter, because they're going to be hotter, which will put a higher evaporative stress on plants and the use of water and so on and so forth. And with all that added energy in the atmosphere, in the oceans, and more moisture in the atmosphere, more variability, as I said, more volatility with more extreme storms, not necessarily more storms. We don't think there'll be more hurricanes, but they may be stronger hurricanes. And I think they may be stronger when they make it up the East Coast, because they're running over warmer waters, which helps to keep them fueled and sustained. More extremes in flood. When it rains, it pours. We're seeing more of our rain in heavy rain events. But if you don't have the trigger to get the moisture out of the atmosphere, you start baking the ground with the sunlight, fewer clouds, hotter temperatures, drier ground, and all of a sudden you're in drought. You know, you're going back and forth and back and forth. And we've seen that so much in recent years. And then sea level is destined to continue rising. We don't know how fast the temperatures are going to rise, because we don't know how you and I are going to treat the atmosphere. Are we going to continue to pollute at a large rate? And this is not just in New York and New Jersey or the US, it's globally. Everything's connected. They may go up 3 to 5 degrees if we get things under control over the rest of this century, or they may go up 6 to 8 or 10 degrees if we just business as usual. Nowadays, we think we're somewhere between the two. We've done a little bit to control those higher emissions, but not nearly enough to go green and bring temperatures down in the future to this level. So probably we'd be thinking somewhere in the 6 to 8 degree range Fahrenheit by the end of the century. It may not sound like a lot. That's a lot when you average it out over an entire year. And sea level, we think 3 to 4 feet rise in sea level by the end of this century, and going up over 5 feet as we go into the 22nd century. Large range in projections here, because we don't know about these emissions that we produce. And then the models still are struggling. We understand sea level rise a lot better than we did 20, 30 years ago. but we've got a ways to go. We don't know how the Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, and so on and so forth are going to deal with the increased warmth of the oceans and the atmosphere. Were sea level to rise 3 feet by the end of the century, this area in light blue on a barrier peninsula in central Jersey, central coastal Jersey, at Seaside Heights, would be permanently underwater, not just during a storm system. And with a 6-foot rise, you're not going to be able to adapt to that kind of sea level rise and be able to sustain your barrier islands, be it Fire Island, be it Long Beach Island, and so on and so forth. So we've got some really important decisions that are going to have to be made down the road this century. And the sooner we make those decisions and the better we understand what's going on to help inform these decisions, the better. Again, just last, we've got a weather network in New Jersey that keeps monitoring things every 5 minutes. New York State, they got a lot more millions of dollars to build their network in the last decade. We've been going for over 20 years, but have never had the support that New York has gotten to build their absolutely terrific weather network. We have a terrific network. They have an absolutely terrific network, as does Delaware, for instance. So we're out there monitoring the climate. Whoops, that's the distribution of our stations in New Jersey. We have 66 in our small state. New York has about 125 stations in a much larger state. So we're more densely situated, but we don't have all the bells and whistles of some of the New York mesonet. Mesonet meaning a medium resolution spatial network. But we gather all sorts of variables, as does New York. We have these 10-meter towers with wind on the top. Some are 3 meters, and we measure a lot of variables, and I won't go any further, but invite you to go njweather.org if you want to visit that site. We have a volunteer network in New York, but it's national. CocoRAS. This is something you libraries I have been involved with, I know, in putting out brochures and helping to promote this network along with the National Weather Service and such. We have about 300 active volunteers in New Jersey who every day have a standard rain gauge and measure precipitation. They learn how to measure snow. Schools are involved, libraries are involved, mosquito commissions are involved, but mostly it's backyard folks of all ages participating in this program. It's a once a day measurement. You're not obligated to do it every day. In New Jersey, we have about 125 observers who miss fewer than 7 days over the course of the year, and we'll send them a certificate acknowledging their service. This is a wonderful citizen science program, and I really would love to see libraries promote it along the way. It's out of Colorado State University, again, national, Canada, and the Bahamas are involved. So summing up, the Northeast has a wild variety of weather and climate conditions. Climate is changing. That foundation is changing. The changes are going to continue. They're going to accelerate. I've not talked about impacts much here. It's for others, another talk perhaps, but the impacts are going to expand in the future, more and more noteworthy. And, you know, self-serving here with weather networks and stuff, we need to keep a watchful eye on things. I could not end without recommending some literature or websites you might go to. This is a great primer. This is the primer you tell your cranky uncle at Thanksgiving dinner who doesn't understand climate change. Read that. From the Royal Society and the U.S. National Academy of Sciences. It's a nice overview of the climate system and climate change. Then we have very short websites, small websites from NOAA. There's one for each state. There is a New York version of this state climate summary. Rutgers, we have a climate resource center and a climate institute for you folks from New Jersey. New Jersey has also produced scientific reports on climate change and resilience strategy report during the Murphy administration. New York City has, has put until recently New Jersey to shame with their climate task force, as has New York State as well, but New York City has a wonderful climate task force. And with that, I'll just thank you and quickly hand the ball over to Cara.
Great. If you want to
I'm
stop
going to
sharing.
stop sharing. I'm going to stop sharing. If I can get my cursor there. It's in the way.
All right. And I am just going to share my screen. And I probably
Got it.
going to have to switch. So now are you seeing my full screen? I'm going to assume that's a yes. I think that's probably yes. Okay, well, thank you so much for being with us today. And I wanted to thank Michele and Rebekkah for the invitation. And of course, I am also always happy to co-present with my colleague, Dave Robinson. I'm Cara Cuite. As you heard, I am a research psychologist, and I do a lot of work in the field of risk communication. And I've done some projects, including one with Dave on coastal storm communication. I also do a lot of work on food safety, communicating about food recalls, and work on how people understand bioengineered or genetically modified foods and the new labels that we have. And this might seem kind of weird and like they don't go together, but the beautiful thing about studying risk communication is that best practices in risk communication tend to, there are some specifics for each type of hazard or risk that we're communicating about, but there are some best practices that span all of them. And in recent years, I have started getting more involved in climate change communication and doing some research on that. So today I'd like to share just some general best practices. They're not necessarily based on my work, but more from the field in general, and then think about some specific considerations for librarians and people who work in libraries. So we had a quick poll. I was just really curious to hear if you or others at your library have done any climate communication, and I think that was going to be launched. There you go. Yes. Have you or your library done any climate communication? And we'll give you all just a 30 seconds to vote on that before we share the results. And in the meantime, I would love if those of you who have done climate communication, if you could just type into the chat what kinds of communication you or others in your library have done. I would be really interested in just in hearing that. And I think at this point we can probably just close the poll. Whoever has had the chance to respond. And I'm seeing a climate, and if we could just share the results, we should be able to share the results with everyone. Okay, so most of you haven't, but about 40% of you have. So this is great. And this is what I'm going to be talking about is great for folks who have or who haven't. And I'm loving all of these examples of book discussions and displays and screenings, movie screenings. This is all great, and posts on social media. I'm going to talk about all of these. So this is perfect. Great. So one of the things I think that makes people sometimes hesitate about wanting to engage in climate change communication is that sometimes we think, well, the goal is I have to persuade people that climate change is real, that climate change is being caused by humans. And I don't know about you, but I would never want to have to give that talk that Dave just gave. I couldn't do that. That's one of the reasons why I love presenting with him. That is not something that I feel comfortable doing, and I would guess that you may not feel competent to do that, or you may feel like that's not your job, but that's not the goal of all climate communication, right? It's not to jump in there and convince every climate denier that climate change is real. There are a lot of other goals that we can focus on for climate communication. So for example, things that really align with the goals of many of you that work in libraries, to educate the public, to stop misinformation about climate and climate change, or to encourage sustainable climate-friendly behavior, right? So it's not necessarily that you're out there trying to persuade people as much as just providing education and good information to your patrons and to the public. So we're going to focus more on those goals. But I did just want to say that there is a group at the Yale program on climate change communication and at George Mason that have been studying sort of how the public thinks about climate over time. And these are data from 2021. And just so you know, the number of people who are dismissive of climate change or doubtful has been shrinking over time. And we can see here that it's just under 20% that don't think that climate change is caused by humans, and that don't think it's actually happening. Whereas the majority of people are either alarmed or concerned. And there's some still in the middle who are maybe a little bit undecided, but most people are on the side of understanding that there's human-caused climate change happening and are concerned about it.
Cara, Cara, I'm sorry to interject. We can see your note screen, so you're not in presentation mode.
Oh, thank you.
Just in case you want to change that. Sorry to interrupt.
I do. That's okay. Sorry. So
It's okay.
I don't even know what's on there. So yeah. So swap. Okay, is that better now? I'm assuming that's better. If it's not better.
It's better.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. All right. So okay. So the first thing that I would like to focus on is connecting with the audience on shared values, right? So when you're starting any conversation, you don't necessarily want to have those contentious conversations, right? Just start with shared values, and that's really going to depend on the situation, where you are, who you're speaking with, the context in which you're speaking with them. But really, some things that you might be able to connect on are things like being an informed consumer of client information or science information. You know, I want to be informed. I know you want to be informed. Or maybe you don't think that that's a value of the person you're speaking to. So you can say something like, I know that you want to keep your family safe or your community safe, and that's something that's important to me also. Or if you have children, they have children, grandchildren, we want to leave a better world for future generations of people. Whatever that common ground is really going to be the best starting point for any conversation that you might have, and start it off on the right foot. Okay. Now, you want to also connect on visuals, stories, narratives. They are much more recommended than focusing too much on data. There's a quote that I like to show people, not pie charts. Now, this is especially challenging for me as someone who spends a lot of time creating charts. I don't really do pie charts that much, but I spend a lot of time creating charts. It can be a real challenge, but we know that connecting to stories, especially of people that are like the audience, that you can directly connect to the audience. So here's a story from late last year from Wired: storytelling will save the earth. It's emotional resonance, not cold statistics, that will bring home the scale of the climate crisis. And so here is something I found on Twitter. This is from UCAR, the University Corporation for Atmospheric Research. This is a group, I know Dave and I both know some folks that work here. They have some of the leading climate scientists in the world, and they have a traveling exhibit that goes around the country, and it's called Real People, Real Climate, Real Changes. And it's really focused on storytelling, and you'll notice it has kids and pictured on the top, not the leading scientists, right? It's not about the scientists, it's about the people who are experiencing climate change and what's happening to them. And so that also got me thinking a little bit about libraries and what you do at libraries. And certainly when I go to I read a lot of nonfiction for my work. So when I go to a library, I'm usually interested in going to get fiction. I'm not there for nonfiction for the most part. So I was curious, I see this a lot, show real people, real climate, whatever. So I did a little bit of investigation because I was wondering if fiction could also be persuasive. And of course, someone has looked at this. It was published now a little over 2 years ago in Environmental Communication. And researchers found that reading environmental literature can persuade people on climate. It can change public perceptions of whether it's human caused, of when the impacts will happen. It can increase worry among folks who read stories. So you might be wondering, well, what did they read in this study, which I was also curious about. These are the 2 books that they presented. I have not read either of them. And also I learned a new term, which is cli-fi, climate fiction. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of that before, but they found that reading these books can change minds about climate issues. So I think, that's a really valuable tool that you all, as people who work in libraries, have at your disposal. And I think that. I'm probably not telling you anything that you don't already know. I found this picture of story time at a New Jersey library. Time magazine had a book. I had an article last October that had a big list of climate change books for kids. These are just 3 of them that they feature. Book displays. I know some of you put book displays in the chat as some things that you're doing. And you can have nonfiction and fiction together. It can be for children, it can be for adults. This is a way to communicate with your audiences about climate. And another thing that I think libraries are so well suited to is the fact that the storytelling doesn't have to be one direction. It's not you telling your audiences or your patrons stories. It can be bi-directional. So here's an example. This is from the UK, but that a library said, we'll be sharing what our members do to reduce their carbon footprint over the next few weeks. And so they're asking, they have a QR code where they're saying, let us know how you hope to lower your carbon footprint. What are you doing about climate change? What's your climate story, right? So it's this bi-directional engagement with the community, which libraries do so well. And I also thought, just coming back to the same image, I blew it up a little bit here from the UCAR exhibit. They say, I don't know if you can read it, but it says, in this exhibit, you'll have the chance to explore these topics with us. So it's a conversation. It's not this one directional thing. Learn what we know and share your stories. So these are, the highest level experts in climate, and they're asking the public to share their story. So it really does have to be a discussion. So it's important to focus on local and relevant impacts and stories, much like, Dave just did for us today. That's a great example of talking about things that are relevant to the audience that you're addressing. So maybe you're in a coastal community and you want to be focusing on things like sea level rise or coastal storm intensity. Maybe it's with children. What have children done to combat climate change, or whatever the case may be? It can be based on location, but also time of year, socio-demographic characteristics. There's a lot of ways to connect what you're talking about. And this was an example. This was in Naperville, but they're talking about local impacts of climate change in the Aurora community in Illinois. Okay, so one other thing that I wanted to make sure I mentioned is that it's important to not scare people. I think you probably know this intuitively, but climate change is something that people are worried about. As I showed you on that slide from the Yale climate study, a lot of people are worried about it. Therapists are saying that they're seeing a lot more of people coming in to therapy over climate anxiety. Here's some books you might have seen, or you may actually have in your libraries, on climate dread, climate anxiety, finding purpose in an age of climate crisis. There's a lot out there. So another important thing to focus on is climate optimism. So this is a quote from Katharine Hayhoe in the New York Times. from last spring. And she says something that I have found in the research that Dave and I have collaborated on, that fear is useful to wake us up and make us pay attention. But if we don't know what to do, it can paralyze us. So we have to be really careful and balance that fear versus sort of optimism and action. So you all may be pleased to see I follow Catherine on Twitter. And just this week, she was in Steamboat, Colorado at the Bud Werner Memorial Library speaking about climate change. And she's really just probably the leading climate change communication scientist out there. And what I noticed about this is that she was engaged in a powerful conversation, right? It's a back and forth. It's not a unidirectional communication affecting the places we love. And so that's sort of the shared values that she's engaging on, and what we can do to create change. So it's not focusing on the fear or the dread, it's focusing on what to do. So that leads and how we can create change. And that leads to provide information about what people can do, whether it's individually, whether it's collective. That's going to change. You know, these are just 4 kind of examples that I have up, but that's certainly not representative of all things. But for example, I was at the Metuchen, New Jersey library where I live. They had an event on electric cars, a presentation, and then afterwards people with electric cars brought them and had them in the parking lot, and everyone could kind of check out the different cars. It was pretty interesting. You know, maybe it's something on renewable energy, maybe it's your Earth Day programming, maybe it's planning for more sustainable earth-friendly communities, you know, that an event that you're hosting, whatever it is. You know, these are the types of things that we want to focus on. And then also we want to something again that I think libraries are so great at doing is engaging the entire community. And I'm going to go a little bit quickly here in the interest of time, but this is a blog about how climate change and the power of libraries. And I thought they did a really good job of just identifying that the impacts of climate change are not felt evenly across all groups, socio-demographic groups, geographical groups. And if you are in a disadvantaged group, you're going to feel the impacts disproportionately. And so some libraries, this is one in Wisconsin, you know, are really drilling down on that. And so this library had film screening on the resilience of queer communities and queer people of color. They also had an event in Spanish to prioritize Latino impact, and others highlighted the voices of the Black community, you know, really bringing a diversity into the library. And then this, I think, in the interest of time, I'm really just going to move through very fast, but I just wanted to say that you can use your social media, as I'm sure all of you know, and I saw some few things in the chat, that you can use it to debunk, to sort of pre-bunk by putting out correct information and then debunking false information or misinformation that's out there. One of the most important things is to include, and I'm just going to scooch down, an authoritative source. And this is the Meta or the Facebook new climate change page, and they list to a lot of authoritative sources. So if you are going to get into a conversation on social media, it's super important to make sure that you're linking to an expert. Maybe it's Dave Robinson. He and the New Jersey Office of the State Climatologist, they are experts. The NOAA, IPCC, whoever it is, whatever debunking you're trying to do is going to be more powerful if you link to an expert source. And so finally, I just wanted to reiterate that the things that we can all do, but you especially in libraries can do to engage on the topic of climate change, is to focus on shared values, use stories and narratives, including fictional stories, ask for stories from the community, keep it local and relevant, keep it optimistic and not scary. And one way to do that is to focus on solutions or what people can do to engage the entire community, especially, you know, keeping in mind, I know Rebekkah mentioned climate justice, you know, who is going to be disproportionately affected, and make sure that you have programming and engagement with those communities. And then combating misinformation online, whether it's pre-bunking or making sure you're linking to expert sources. And then I just have a couple of different resources. I don't need to go through them here, but I think we're going to share out the slides so you can get them there. I also wanted to just mention the Sustainable Libraries Initiative, which you saw, the UCAR traveling exhibit, And then I wanted to close just with this. I came across this on Twitter this week. I thought you would perhaps enjoy it. Lee with 3 E's is being swindled. I don't know what that is, but old Mama Earth responded to him. If you want accurate information about climate change or anything else for that matter, visit a library once in a while instead of YouTube. I thought that was a good way to close. There are people out there, you know, rooting for you and seeing you as great sources of information on this topic. And with that, I will stop. So we have a couple minutes for questions.
Hey, Cara. And that was a really great presentation. Also, David, thank you so much for your presentation.